Which vehicles have the best and the worst resale value? That's what we're going to find out. Welcome to Car Help Corner, where we help you, the consumer, master the process of car buying and car ownership. For this video, I'm going to share the top 10 vehicles that have the best resale value, and I'm also going to share the top 10 that plummet in value the fastest, so that you'll know which vehicles you will lose the most and the least amount of money on. The information for this video comes from iSeeCars, a reputable car buying website, which analyzed over 1 million vehicles sold for this survey. And remember, if you enjoy and get value out of this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. So let's start off with the 10 vehicles that have the best resale value. And in the number 10 spot on the list, we have the Toyota Corolla. According to the survey, the Toyota Corolla only loses around 24.5% of its value over the first 5 years of ownership, which is the equivalent of around $5,800. And this one is really no surprise. The Corolla has long been one of the most reliable and economical small cars that you can buy. And it's extremely desirable to buy both brand new and used, which is why it holds on to its value extremely well over time. And the next vehicle that we have in the number 9 spot is the Subaru Crosstrek. According to iSeeCars, the Crosstrek only loses 24.5% of its value in the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $7,200. And again, much of this has to do with the Crosstrek's desirability. This is a very well-designed small SUV for those who want something that's economical, reliable, and still offers all the capability of an SUV. So it's really no surprise that it holds on to its value extremely well over time. And the same is true for the next vehicle that's in the number 8 spot, which is the Toyota CHR. The CHR only loses 24.4% of its value over the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $6,600. Now, even though the CHR is still available in markets in Europe and other parts of the world, unfortunately it's no longer sold brand new in North America. The CHR was replaced with the Corolla Cross, and hopefully this one proves to have the same very strong resale value as the CHR over time. Only time will tell, but for now, let's move on to the next vehicle in the number 7 spot, which is the Chevrolet Camaro. According to the survey, the Camaro only loses 24.2% of its value over the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $10,000. And the Camaro wasn't the only sports car to make the list. In the number 6 spot, we also have the Subaru BRZ. The BRZ, also known as the BRZ, loses only 23.4% of its value in the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $8,000. And next up in the number 5 spot, we have the Honda Civic. Amazingly, the Honda Civic only loses 21.5% of its value in the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $5,800. Imagine buying a regular car like the Civic and only losing a little over $1,000 in value each year that you own it. That's pretty astonishing. But much like the Corolla, the Crosstrek, and a few others, a lot of that has to do with the Civic's very strong desirability among consumers. Civics are known for being very reliable, fuel efficient, well designed, and just generally really good cars to buy and keep for a really long time. And now moving on to the next one in the number 4 spot. This one should not be a surprise to many, which is the Jeep Wrangler. The Wrangler only loses 20.8% of its value in the first 5 years of ownership, which is the equivalent of just under $9,000. For many years now, the Wrangler has been one of the top performers when it comes to resale value. Even though they don't necessarily have the best reliability, they are in extremely high demand, and most of that has to do with their image and the fun factor. There's no way around it, a lot of consumers just really like Wranglers. So even though it might not be the best buy when it comes to its pricing or its build quality in the long run, at least you know you're not going to lose very much money on it if you decide to sell it down the road. And next up in the number 3 spot, we have the Toyota Tacoma. According to the study, the Tacoma only loses 20.4% of its value in the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $8,300. And again, much of this has to do with the fact that the Tacoma has built a reputation for being one of the most durable, reliable, no-nonsense work trucks that you can buy. And next up on the list in the number 2 spot, we have a sports car, which is the Porsche 718 Cayman. The Cayman only loses 17.6% of its value in the first 5 years of ownership, which is the equivalent of just over $13,000. That's certainly not a lot of money to lose on a car like this, especially one that's this expensive to buy brand new. But as impressive as that is, it's not as good as the vehicle that's in the number 1 spot, which is the Porsche 911. Incredibly, the 911 only loses 9.3% of its value in the first 5 years of ownership, which is the equivalent of just over $18,000. Considering that 911s can easily cost upwards of $150,000, sometimes even over $200,000 when they're brand new, to lose such little money on it over the first 5 years is pretty incredible. There were a few other vehicles that made the top 25 list that are also really worth mentioning. The number 1 full-size pickup truck when it comes to resale value on the list is the Toyota Tundra. The Tundra came in the 13th spot, and according to the survey, only loses 25.3% of its value in the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $12,000. The number 1 crossover SUV in the survey was the Toyota RAV4, which came in the 20th spot and only losing 27.2% of its value over 5 years, which is the equivalent of just over $8,800. And the number 1 mid-sized SUV, that was the Toyota 4Runner, which came in the 22nd spot, only losing 27.4% of its value over 5 years, just over $13,000. So looking at the top resale value list, there's a few very clear trends here. Aside from a few specialty cars and sports cars, the majority of vehicles on this list are those that are known for having very strong reliability and build quality, vehicles that the majority of consumers are really interested in buying. But we see a very different trend when it comes to the top 10 vehicles with the worst resale value that plummet in price over time. So let's move on to that list, starting with the first vehicle that's in the number 10 spot, and that one is the Audi A7. According to the survey, the A7 loses 57.2% of its value over the first 5 years, which is the equivalent of nearly $49,000. And the next vehicle that we have in the number 9 spot is the Jaguar XF. The XF loses 57.6% of its value over the first 5 years, the equivalent to nearly $40,000. And the next vehicle that's in the number 8 spot is the Maserati Levante. The Levante loses 57.8% of its value over the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $55,000. And next up, the vehicle that's in the number 7 spot is the Infiniti QX80. The QX80 loses 58.1% of its value over the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $47,000. It's becoming clear that the vehicles that made the top 10 list are those that are either known for having poor reliability, are not very desirable among consumers, so their popularity in sales is extremely low, or vehicles that are just known for being extremely expensive to own over long-term ownership, which is why the majority of used car buyers just stay away from them. In any case, let's move on to the next one that's in the number 6 spot, and that is the BMW X5. The X5 loses 58.2% of its value in the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $44,000. Compare that to the very similar Lexus RX, which only loses around 40% of its value. That just goes to show you what a major difference a reputation for reliability can make. And the next SUV that we have in the number 5 spot is the Cadillac Escalade. Although the less luxurious GMC Yukon and Chevy Tahoe are not too bad, the same can be said for the more expensive Escalade, which loses 58.5% of its value in the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $63,000. And the next vehicle that we have in the number 4 spot is the BMW 5 Series. The 5 Series loses 58.8% of its value over the first 5 years, the equivalent of nearly $38,000. But the 5 Series is not the only mid-size luxury sedan to make the list. In the number 3 spot, we have the Maserati Ghibli. This one loses 61.3% of its value over 5 years, the equivalent to just over $58,000. But as bad as that is, it's nowhere near as bad as the next vehicle in the number 2 spot, which is the BMW 7 Series. The 7 Series loses 61.8% of its value over the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $72,000. Quite terrible, but incredibly, there is one other vehicle that's even worse than this, and that is the one that's in the number 1 spot, which is the Maserati Quattroporte, losing 64.5% of its value in the first 5 years, the equivalent to just over $90,000. Imagine buying a vehicle brand new and losing nearly $20,000 a year on it every single year that you own it. I certainly couldn't imagine that, and it's a good thing that the Quattroporte is not really a strong seller because that's an awful lot of money to lose. Other notable vehicles that made the worst resale value list were the Nissan Armada in the number 15 spot, which loses 55.7% of its value over 5 years. The worst electric vehicle is the Tesla Model S in the number 19 spot, which loses 55.5% of its value over 5 years. And of course, no worst list is complete without at least one Land Rover. In the number 24 spot, we have the Range Rover, which loses 53.9% of its value over the first 5 years, which is the equivalent to nearly $70,000. Interestingly though, it wasn't actually luxury vehicles that were the worst category when it comes to resale value. The types of vehicles that actually plummet in value the most, according to the survey, are electric vehicles. Electric vehicles overall lose 49.1% of their value in the first 5 years of ownership, which makes them worse than any other category. These include vehicles like the Tesla Model 3, the Tesla Model X, the Nissan Leaf, the Chevrolet Bolt EV, and the Tesla Model S, all of which lose roughly between 42 to 55% of their value in the first 5 years. So what's the number 1 category vehicle when it comes to resale value? Well, that would be hybrids. According to the survey, hybrids lose around 37.4% of their value in the first 5 years, which is better than any other category of vehicle. And the top performing hybrids when it comes to resale value are the Honda Accord Hybrid, the Toyota Camry Hybrid, the Toyota RAV4 Hybrid, the Toyota Prius Prime, and the regular Toyota Prius. All of these vehicles lose roughly between 36 to 28% of their value in the first 5 years of ownership, which is really impressive. So after watching this video, which of these vehicles would you consider buying? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. You can also check out my other videos by clicking these links over here. Make sure to follow me on Instagram, and if you need additional car buying advice, recommendations, or help with getting a great deal on your next new car purchase, make sure to visit carhelpcan.com. Thanks so much for watching, and see you next time.